This is a video I never thought that I would make and that I had to think really hard about actually making and putting out there. So, there's a lot of discussion regarding the tragic events surrounding Danielle Ayoka, aka Mystic Lipstick. And I'm not someone who jumps on trends. I'm not someone who is overly interested in, pulling up a chart anytime, a celebrity passes away or there's some kind of crazy event in the news. That's kind of just not my thing. And not to say that anyone who does that, shouldn't. However, I realized that I had to lend my voice to this conversation for a variety of reasons. Number one, I had personal experience with Danielle and her services. Number two, I am a member of the astrological community and the spiritual community, and this does affect us. Many of us have been quite viscerally affected by these tragic events. And number three, the reason why I'm lending my voice to this conversation is because there's an important lesson for all of us in this. And so the purpose of this video is threefold, obviously. And so I just wanted to, hop on here and discuss this. Okay. So for those who are not familiar with the story, about a week ago, actually the day of the eclipse, a somewhat famous astrology influencer, her name was Danielle Johnson. She also went by the name Danielle Ayoka. And on Twitter, she had a huge following and she was known as Mystic Lipstick. And the news reports have said that on the day of the eclipse, she allegedly got into an altercation with her boyfriend who she lived with. She ended up stabbing him to death. Then she fled the scene with her two children, one being an 8-month-old, the other being a 9-year-old. And she basically threw both of the children onto moving traffic on a busy LA freeway. And unfortunately, the 8-month-old passed away and the 9-year-old sustained some injuries and was hospitalized. And then thereafter, she crashed her car into a tree and unalived herself, essentially. So she has passed. So her boyfriend, and her 8-month-old child have passed away. And this is just a beyond tragic event. And it really shocked me and saddened me when I heard the news because she was someone that I followed. So by way of backstory, I began Divine Feminine Works in 2018. Although I was not active in it at the time, that was the time that I really started my company. And one of the first things, that I did was I created social media accounts and I immediately started following people who were into spirituality, tarot, astrology, things like that. And Mystic Lipstick was one of the first accounts I followed on Twitter. I thought that her astrology commentary was great. I felt like, I learned a lot from her. She was really dope. Now, she also advertised herself as a healer. Okay. And so she used to do these aura cleanses. I believe that up until the time of her death, she actually still did. But back in 2018, 2019, she would do these like distance healing sessions where you would pay a nominal fee, like 10 or 20 bucks. And then she would send you healing energy remotely, obviously. And so at the time of the distance healing, you really didn't have anything to do. You would just basically receive this energy. And so this was the experience that I had with her because back in 2018, I wasn't someone who was yet familiar with distance healing, although now I am a Reiki practitioner, so I understand how it works. But back then I didn't. But I was curious. I was like, wow, I was on my spiritual journey. I'm like, wow, this is great. Like and it seemed like she had very positive feedback from past distance healing work that she had done. Like people were raving about it. They loved it. They felt so, refreshed and healed after these sessions. So I was like, all right, cool. Let me try it. So paid the money, right? And then at the time of, the designated time for the distance healing, I kind of just sat and, tried to see what was going to happen. I didn't have too much of an expectation. And I was like, you know what? If this turns out to be bullshit, then fine. It was only $10, $20 lost. No big deal. At the time of the distance healing, when this healing energy was being sent, the only way I could describe how I felt was crazy. I felt manic. I felt psychotic. I felt like my mind was all over the place. I felt like I wanted to jump out of a window. I felt viscerally crazy. And I'm thankful that I was able to observe these feelings as opposed to being immersed in them. And I said to myself, I'm like, what the fuck is going on? I'm like, I'm not someone who ever feels like this. I didn't expect to feel anything with this distance healing. And what I'm feeling is unnerving. And I was very disturbed by the feeling. I'm thankful that this wasn't something that, again, I was immersed in. I was kind of able to observe it, understand that this was not me. This is not my way of thinking, that this was sort of transmitted to me. And I let it go. And I was like, wow, I'm never doing this again. Now, this is an important fact, okay? Because I'm going to develop this in a little bit. However, I was very disappointed because I was like, wow, this is not what I expected. And I felt like maybe there was some sort of sinister agenda behind it, or whatever. I try not to give it too much thought. I was like, listen, that was an experience that I don't want to experience again, and left it at that. And so I can't remember if it was that same night or the next day. I went on Twitter to see like what other people's reactions were. And I saw that a lot of people had the same reaction that I did. They were like, what was that? Like, that was crazy. I didn't like it. This, that, and the third. And at that point, I was like, okay, I realized that this is not necessarily a situation for me. I still continued to follow her on Twitter. I would still see her tweets from time to time. And then as the years went on, I would hear about her from time to time. And a lot of times it was this sort of erratic behavior. In the papers, they said that in the days leading up to the eclipse, she was, her messages were very erratic. They were very doomsday kind of like messages. And, it reminded me of that distance healing session I had with her back in 2018. And I was like, wow, that's really, it's not only telling, but it's definitely a shame. Now, the purpose of this video is not to demonize her at all. It's not to say, see, like, of course this would have happened to her. That is not the purpose at all. The purpose is to discuss this because, number one, this tragic situation has brought light to astrology. Because if you look at a lot of the headlines regarding this situation, astrology influencer, disturbed by the eclipse. And so it's opening this door for a lot of people to provide commentary on astrology generally. Now, I'm thankful that we live in a time right now when people are comfortable with astrology. A lot more people have adopted astrology into their lives. And for that, I'm truly thankful, right? Because astrology is a wonderful tool for self-discovery. It's not just fun, right? Learning about your sun sign and perhaps compatibility with someone else. And the way that I teach astrology is, I use it for self-discovery, understanding myself. And in understanding myself, I can better myself. I have personally used astrology to heal myself and others, along with other modalities as well. But astrology, I believe, is a tool for self-discovery. And so you're going to have and you already do have a lot of people who were saying, look at astrology. See, astrology did this, astrology did that. Look at what happened. She was all into astrology. And not even just astrology. According to the news reports, when they entered her apartment, later on that day after all of these tragic events had transpired, they said they found tarot cards, they found black feathers. And it's like, okay, obviously this makes for a very juicy story, right? Oh my gosh, she was an astrology influencer. She committed murder and suicide. And oh my God, like, look at all this occult stuff. It's the occult that does this kind of stuff. It is not. I'm here to tell you it is not. I'm thankful that over the last few days, I've seen quite a few other astrology personalities within this astrological community create videos on this situation. And I say I'm thankful for that because we need to lend our voices to this conversation. And one of the astrologers that I follow here on YouTube is named Adam Ellenboss. And he put up a very emotional video about this because it is an emotionally triggering event. You know, a family has been destroyed essentially, and a life has been lost. You know, despite my personal experiences with Danielle and her work, she was a light. She was lending her voice and her expertise to this conversation, namely astrology, helping people to discover themselves. And she was a self-proclaimed healer. And from what I saw, I do believe that she did help some people. So I'm not here to demonize her at all. Now, one of the things that Adam Ellenboss said was that, you know, this shouldn't be a conversation about defending astrology, right? About, oh no, astrology doesn't do this, astrology doesn't do that. Astrology is real, right? I always equate astrology to like gravity, right? You don't understand how gravity works, but it affects you nonetheless. You're subject to it. The energy of the planets will affect you one way or another. And studying how the planets affect us is the study of astrology, plain and simple, right? Now, it will affect us in different ways depending on what you are predisposed to. And this brings up an important point about mental health. Understanding astrology, understanding the occult sciences, understanding things like, African traditional religions and things like that. Even religions, even traditional religions such as Christianity, Islam, all of that, Judaism. It's more than just knowing the information. It's more than just the book knowledge. Spirituality is so much more than that, regardless of the modality, regardless of the genre, if you will. Spirituality is real, and it affects us in a real way. However, if you have unchecked mental issues, that knowledge, that spiritual knowledge, can wreak havoc in your life. It's not the modality, it's not the astrology, it's not the occult knowledge that essentially fucks you up. It's your mental health and your mental well-being. We're living in an age right now where people are really ascribing to new age spirituality, right? And there's nothing new about it. It's ancient. It's just ancient knowledge coming back around. And a lot of people are having Kundalini awakenings. They're having spiritual awakenings, right? Those things are no joke. It's not some beautiful aesthetic or some really nice affirmation. You feel that shit. You experience that shit. And if you have a lot of shadow work to do that you haven't done, if you have unchecked mental issues, mental health issues that you haven't addressed, it will wreak havoc in your life, whether you are practicing astrology, occultism, Christianity, Judaism. Mental health is mental health, and unchecked mental health is a dangerous thing. And it's in my opinion that is what happened here. And I feel like I can attest to that because of that distance healing session I had with MysticxLipstick back in 2018. You're transmitting your energy with these distance healings. And if you're not mentally stable, if you're not, in a frame of mind that isn't manic, you will be imparting that energy onto other people. Plain and simple. And again, this isn't meant to demonize her. I'm just saying what I experienced and lending my opinion based on the situation. I think that there were serious mental health issues that went unchecked. It said that one of the children, that passed away was an 8-month-old. Perhaps she had postpartum issues, along with perhaps unchecked mental issues, right? Like, there's so many possibilities with this. It's not the astrology made her do it. But the one thing I will say about this is that eclipse energy is real. And the fact that this happened on the day of the eclipse, in the early morning hours of the eclipse on April 8th, it's not lost on me. And, I've done videos on the eclipse energy, and I by no means think of myself as a love and light kind of person. I give it to you straight up, no chaser, right? If something is not necessarily beneficial energy, I will tell you that. But I'm also not going to fear monger either. I'm not going to tell you to go hide in your house and, pull the covers over your head, right? There's ways to deal with this. Now, eclipse energy is very erratic. I think that's why the ancients were so afraid of it, because anything could happen. And a lot of tragic and devastating things can happen during eclipse. I personally have known people who have died on the day of the eclipse, who have gotten arrested surprisingly on the day of an eclipse, who have gotten into car accidents on the day of an eclipse. I personally know people who have experienced that. And I'm sure that if you were to think about it, you can think of things such as those that have happened on or around an eclipse. But if you take eclipse energy and then you add mental instability to it, it's sort of a recipe for disaster. And it is, in my opinion, that's what happened in this situation. And it breaks my heart. When I first heard about this situation, the fact that it was her and the fact that, a family has been destroyed essentially, it broke my heart, because nobody deserves that. Nobody. And to her and her family and everyone involved in this situation, I send nothing but healing energy and love. Pure love. It is a cautionary tale for us, though. And that is sort of the main impetus behind me doing this video. Number one, please understand, astrology cannot make you do anything. Okay? Everything in our environment affects us in some way, shape, or form, whether it is emotionally, whether it is physically, whether it is mentally, every single thing that we come into contact with. And that includes the planets, right? It's not that astrology made her do it. It's not that astrology is to blame for this or the eclipse is to blame for this, right? Astrology is a modality. It's a thing. And I feel like we have to get out of the practice of something is good or it's bad. Things are just things. They just are. How you use them depends on whether something is good or bad. And again, this isn't necessarily in defense of astrology. I'm just calling a spade, right? Astrology can't make you do anything, okay? Number two, it's really important that you do the healing work on yourself. It's not enough to just know esoteric knowledge. It's not just enough to know the Bible. It's not just enough to know the Torah even, or any sort of spiritual text or spiritual dogma. Spirituality goes deeper than that. It's not just the knowledge, it's the experience. And if you are not mentally stable, if you have shadow work that has not been done, like I said before, it can and likely will at some point wreak havoc in your life. Now, that healing work can look different for everybody. It can mean talking to a therapist or other professional that can help you process your emotions. It could be something like just talking to a friend or a pastor even, right? To gain clarity on what you're feeling. It can be something like sound therapy, right? It runs the gamut how to do the shadow work. It can be meditation, journaling, scripting, whatever it is. There's work that needs to be done when we are entrusted with spiritual and esoteric knowledge. Without that work, you do run the risk of perhaps something major happening. Not going to happen all the time. But again, at the root of this situation, I believe, is mental health. And mental health is super important. And the last thing I will say is that you really need to be mindful of who you follow, who you work with, who you allow to work on you. These things matter. And it's not the case that you're always going to know someone's mental health just by looking at them or even talking to them or engaging with them. That's where discernment comes in. That's where your intuition comes in. Your intuition will tell you whether you should work with someone or not, or whether you should engage with someone or not. But that is important. I learned that kind of the hard way with this situation. but it's important for you to basically vet who you are allowing into your energetic field, or who you are allowing to teach you, or who you are following or allowing to lead you. These things are very important. They're not to be taken lightly. You know, it's just such a tragic situation. And it was so difficult to read because she was not only an astrology influencer, she was a mother, she was a person, she was somebody's daughter, she was somebody's girlfriend. And it's important for us to remember that. This isn't to demonize her. This isn't to be like, oh my gosh, of course no. Like I said, I send love and healing to the souls of, her family members that have passed, and to her soul as well. And I feel like this is definitely going to be the start of a lot more dialogue with respect to astrology, perhaps looking deeper into astrology. It's interesting to me because as a practicing astrologer, I feel like because I'm in such the technical part of it, I mean, of course, I infuse spirituality into it, of course. But it's so weird to me when people are just like, oh my gosh, you see, astrology is so evil. I'll never forget, I was telling someone I was an astrologer and they were like, oh my gosh, you worship the sun. Like, oh my God, that's so bad. And I was like, actually, no. And interestingly enough, this person came from a very, kind of strict Christian family. And I was like, actually, you worship the sun in a different way. But that's another video for another time. But yeah, I think that this is going to be a time where people are going to look more deeply into this, especially because so many more people are getting into astrology, getting familiar with astrology, implementing astrology into their lives. So I hope that if this video reaches you and you're hearing this, that you take heed to what I've said and, get the lessons that this tragic situation has ultimately taught us. All right. Thanks so much, guys. And I'll see you in my next video.